I thought I'd like to explain why I feel I was wrong about consciousness, and then to explore my current understanding of consciousness and how we can combine science and spirituality with a new paradigm. So in the spirit of the Gnostics, I think I've always been a bit of a heretic. I think all those views are heretical in our culture at the moment. But I have to confess, today I feel a bit like a heretic amongst the heretics, because I want to challenge an idea which I held myself and which I know a lot of people looking to combine science and spirituality take as central. So when I look at consciousness, it has many meanings. I think Ian said that, but there's two which I'm going to focus on. And one is that consciousness is referred to these experiences we're having. This is consciousness. The problem with that is it can just become a synonym for experience. And unless we can contrast it with the fact that we're receiving information from the world unconsciously as well as consciously. And this is certainly how Jung would have understood consciousness. So a good example of that is in the morning, if you have the alarm clock on, you hear the alarm go off unconsciously, you're asleep, and then, so you register that information unconsciously, and then you become conscious, oh, the alarm is ringing, and then that's consciousness. So I'm happy with that meaning of the word consciousness, as long as we can understand it in that way. But I want to focus on another more philosophical meaning, and that's the idea of pure consciousness. That everything exists within pure consciousness. Consciousness is a thing. You get this idea, or a presence, in Indian philosophy, most mystical philosophy actually. Advaita Vedanta has huge influence on me with this. And in the West, you get it with idealism, which is a bad name for the idea, confusing name if you're not familiar with philosophy, but that's its idea. Everything exists within consciousness. And that's the idea that I've come to question and have come to the conclusion, provisionally, like all my ideas, that there is actually no such thing as pure consciousness. It's a reification. It's making a thing from something which is actually an activity. So the idea of pure consciousness and consciousness being the ground has not been making sense to me for a little while, actually. But the moment that it kind of went flip, and I went, no, this doesn't work. We have to find a different way, was a very embarrassing realization, and I'll share it with you. And I am embarrassed genuinely, because it was about seeing through an argument that I myself had used, and people in spiritual circles, which is where I've lived my life, use all the time, especially non-dual circles. And here I am, 61, and I finally saw that it was obviously bad argument. And I'm surprised it took me so long. And like a lot of spiritual stuff that I'm interested in, it's a kind of phenomenological argument. It says, look at your experience. And that's why it's so attractive to me. And the argument goes something like this. Look, have you ever experienced anything that didn't exist in consciousness? Everything is a sensation or an idea in consciousness. So you know from your own immediate experience, forget all the philosophy and clever ideas, you know from your immediate experience that consciousness is the ground. It's obvious. Now, if you say it in that tone of voice, I found it usually was pretty convincing. And it's attractive for that reason. But what's become very, very obvious to me is that actually, of course, I say of course, it's not of course, the question itself is conceptually laden. And David quoted R.G. Collingwood at the beginning of the conference, saying the answer to any question presupposes whatever the question presupposes. And in that question I asked, or anything like it, which you'll hear from non-dual teachers and philosophers in this area all the time, have you experienced anything that didn't exist in consciousness as a sensation or an idea? Well, what's already in there is the idea that there is something called consciousness, that things exist within. Is there? Maybe. Maybe not. It's an interpretation. And is what I'm experiencing sensations in consciousness? Maybe. Or am I actually experiencing the world? Am I conscious of the world, which is our common sense understanding? So all I want to say here really is that this argument, which is so central to a lot of spiritual non-dual teachers, it's really just saying something obvious. All it's really saying is, have you ever had a conscious experience which wasn't a conscious experience? To which, of course, the answer is no. And going back to my analogy with the alarm clock, have you ever had an experience which didn't arise in consciousness? Well, kind of, yes. Because when you're woken by the alarm clock in the morning, you register it unconsciously and then consciously. So it feels like this just collapsed on me and led me to go, okay, so if it's not given, if what's given is this, the experiences we're having ourselves, which can then be interpreted in many different ways. And that's one possibility, one that I was very attracted to, one I now reject. So does idealism or consciousness as the ground, does it have more explanatory power? And can it bring science and spirituality together? I don't think so. I want to lay out how I've come to think about this for you to consider. I have come to the conclusion that the way we can combine science and spirituality into one narrative, into one understanding, is by using what is arguably, I think, the biggest idea that human beings have ever had, certainly one of them, which came up in the beginning of the last century. And that's that the universe is not a thing. It's a process. And it's a process of evolution or emergence in which novelty is constantly arising based on what's happened before. And that's got us, as Brian Swim says, from hydrogen to has become you and me having this conversation. What a vision that is. And yet everything seems to bear it out right now. And I see it in the moment. And as someone who's very attracted to that phenomenological approach, I like that. Because every new moment seems to emerge from the one before. It's always novel. And sometimes that novelty is quite minor, and then sometimes it's quite major. And it's the emergence of something new, something absolutely new. Well, that seems to be what's been happening for 14 billion years. So the underlying hypothesis that I'm exploring, which I just love because of its elegance, that's why it captured me, is that that's what existence is. Existence is the realization of potentiality in ever more emergent ways. That's what it is. Which would mean, and this is the thing that I'm following, that everything has emerged or evolved. Everything. Everything. Everything which has form, everything which has qualities, everything which exists, which stands out, that's what the word means, has evolved. And that's the narrative that can unite everything. Because what I would want to say is, if there's any truth, and I think there really is, to spiritual ideas, like the idea of a soul domain, the Duat, the Bardos, the whatever you want to call that, if there's truth to psychic experiences, the dreamlike nature of life, the synchronicities, immortality of the soul, they've all evolved. Because existence is this process of evolving onto ever more emergent levels. So I'll say a little bit about that at the end, but let's just focus on consciousness. So if you look at consciousness, it seems to be an emergent quality of the universe. I look at chemicals and I would say they don't seem to have consciousness in any meaningful sense of the word consciousness. But we have consciousness. So somewhere between chemicals and you and me, consciousness has evolved. And by consciousness here, I'm kind of meaning something that knows that it's experiencing something or knows that it exists is also inherent, I think, in that idea. But perhaps there's a pure consciousness, which is the ground. That's the fundamental idealist idea. But I don't think that's the best concept or the best term. Because if everything is evolving, we need a word that describes the simplest foundational quality which has become or evolved into everything else. And I don't think consciousness is parsimonious enough. There's too much there. Consciousness is knowing itself or experiencing something, or these are big things. And the word which appeals to me is an old philosophical word from the Greeks, very fond of, and that's the word being. Simply the quality of being, of existing at all. And I look around me and I say, what's the one quality that everything's got in common? Even my ideas, even numbers, everything has got in common. They exist in their own unique way. They exist. So I want to suggest that we have a quality of being which is taking on ever more emergent qualities. Being is in the process of becoming. It's a very old idea, that one, of course. And that the ground is, as being, is nothing particular. It has no particular qualities. But it has the qualities, but it can take on all those qualities. That's the potentiality to become anything. So the ground of being is unconscious. It's not consciousness, it's unconscious because it's un-everything. It is non-dual. It is actually non-dual. And consciousness, I think, implies a subject and an object. And bringing in consciousness from nowhere and just plonking it at the beginning doesn't help. Where does it come from? Where do these qualities arise from? We can't, if anything you put at the beginning, you can't explain. So let's put at the beginning, or the ground, let's say, rather than the beginning. The ground needs to be the simplest quality possible. And that seems to be being. So that, you know, if you put in consciousness, you often get as well, it's like, you see, it doesn't just end there. Suddenly consciousness has intentionality and intelligence. It wants to know itself. It's doing something. So now you're basically back with God, the creator, in a different form. And that is a huge thing. You've explained the mystery of existence by a bigger mystery, which doesn't really get us anywhere, I don't think. So if we let go of that idea of consciousness and see it as an emergent property of the universe, a quality, what is it and how did it emerge? And this brings us to the famous hard problem, which is basically, how does this conscious experience arise from a piece of meat?